No, I know that I'm not.
But your writing is borderline, it could be an artistic expression. Why do you you immediately said no?
Yeah, because I did question that as well, and I mean, I started actually, making photographs, and I was kind of because the university I went to was former American college, like former Robert College. So it was still an American structure, which was amazing. And it still is functioning. But of course, maybe you've heard there has been issues with the head of the school being appointed now by the government. Normally it's needs elections. And so we had so many social clubs. So I signed up to the photography arts club. And I was also interested in fine arts and theater. So I kind of explored those different terrains, because I think I was very much interested in this kind of, the possibility of self-expression, and in a way that leads to self-actualization. Like, how could I find ways in which, that would enable me to elaborate or elucidate my relationship with the world around me. So photography was one of them. And I have some terrible paintings as well, so I did try, but what I found was I was very much drawn into kind of theory. And I think I have creativity, definitely, and but I don't have the creativity that an artist have. I think it's a different level of creativity, and that kind of transformative force, I don't find it that is in me. That's why I'm clearly no, I'm not an artist. Although, being an independent curator for many years, or working with and at institutions, kind of makes me close to being like an artist as well, work like an artist, or think like an artist in a way. But I don't think I have the same, I mean, maybe it's very Kantian, but same faculty of aesthetic judgment, or I don't know. I really don't think that about me.
But in order not to think that about you, you must think that of someone else.
Yeah.
Right. So there are people that you are. So how do you recognize an artist then?
Oh, that's a very good question, actually. Yeah, I think it's many things. I mean, first of all, there is a learned knowledge of what is art, and what looks like art. But then there's that kind of individual relationship that you construct with the world around you. So when you see an artwork, then you kind of feel the level of, you can say, the tournament from the context, or the shift, the way that that encounter moves you is different to an encounter that is more defined on, how can I say, use, efficiency, or things like that. So I'm actually, it's I think I mostly operate within the domain of the artworks, and of course work with the artists as well, and then engage with artists who are the makers of those works. But I think for me, it ends with the work, or it starts with the work. So yeah, so sometimes you meet people, they say they are artists, and then you look their portfolio and you don't think that they are, it's and at the moment we have a lot of that as well. We have a lot of objects that look like art, smell like art, yet it is not, and I think the same thing happens with the practitioners. But I don't have a radar or a filter.
Okay, so how do you okay, so you basically recognize artists through the work.
Yeah, I think so.
That's really interesting. But then how do you recognize, because you've just said that there are things that smell like art and feel like art but are not. So how do you then recognize art is the question.
No, that's good. I wasn't expecting these questions. No, I think it's really about, how can I say, so I'm very much, also maybe it's again another perhaps like a philosophical projection into it, but I'm very much interested in kind of like the field in which the artworks denote, and that it is open, that openness enables them so in a way to kind of like associate with different contexts, to even sometimes like be stripped bare of their context, their original context that they're coming from, and be placed in a different context and still stand. We can unpack that, like from aesthetical, critical, political, intellectual positions. But I think what is not art is very easy to find, because once you, like literally lift the kind of like the semantic surface of that, it can be a tangible or intangible entity that is named as the, as a work of art or a body of art. When you, lift the surface, there's void. Like it can only be one thing, or it can only exist in one context or in one way of approaching. Because for me, and that's also like something that I've been voicing a lot as a curator, it's very important to kind of like, have an integral responsibility, or in a way like to negotiate how you relate to the concept or the notion of responsibility. Because with every exhibition, with every act of making art public, you are recontextualizing the work of art. Like you can't take, like the work of art in a studio context has a different manifestation than in an artist-run space, or then at a major museum, or in a storage of a major collection, or as like in the basement of a private collector. It constantly changes contexts. And then also, every exhibition also kind of responds to, let's say the psychogeographical parameters of where it is taking place, and when, and who is it talking to, who is having, like who is the conversation partners. Then the work of art also attains another context. So, but the, like the unicorn mode of like, oh, it looks like a unicorn, smells like a unicorn, but it's a hippo, is like it becomes very immediate. And then there's also that kind of blur between functionality, decor, advertorial, branding, like art can be branded as well, but also at the same time, how can I say, the use of the object, and I'm very much interested in that, perhaps like very old school, but I'm very much interested in the uselessness that art, like inhabits. And that's what, like that, what also like the main divide between art and design is that, like the kind of the notion of function, the notion of use, and that art can actually explore and expand on the notion of uselessness, and without being useful in any form or manner. Yeah.
And so it feels like there is a series of tests that we can have for a work.
Yeah, exactly. Put it in water.
Yes.
25 degrees Celsius.
Yes.
Pressure.
What happens to it? So what are the tests? So I think that's an interesting one about decontextualization and the recontextualization of a work of art, not just physically within one maybe socio-political environment, but then internationally, for example.
Yeah.
So is it possible that a work of art becomes a work of art by being transported somewhere else, that may not be a work of art in its original place of origin?
I wouldn't think so, because like even in its primary conceptualization, artistic intent needs to be part of that production. So, and anything that is charged with artistic intent, like actually falls into that again, let's say if it's a set of artworks, like the set that contains all the artworks, then it falls into that set. But then there's also like there are a couple of approaches. So one of them that I also like sometimes like feel like wildly challenged but truly believe in is that every artwork actually expands and contributes to the what we think as the definition of art. So with everything that we see and everything we encounter, and even though we in person don't encounter it, but that is out there in the world, is open to encounter, contributes to an understanding and the conceptualization of what art is. So then it's actually quite a strong position. And then at the same time, that's why, that responsibility needs to resonate everywhere. But at the same time, if let's say a production wasn't charged artistically with an artistic intent of, like making an artwork, then I don't know if it can stand in other contexts as well. It's really, and it's perhaps like much more subliminal, much more intangible, kind of like set of relationships applied to that body. But I think it's still, how can I say, there's still, we can definitely talk about that kind of the charge or that kind of resonance. And sometimes you really see, I don't know, like for instance, I'm thinking of Vera Kalmins, her work where she gets like a meteorite and then she kind of like cuts it into half and paints an object that is identical to that, like cut meteorite, and places them together, and then kind of deals with this idea of the original and like the artwork and the production. Even with that, I think because the object is so charged, we can like outside of any context or any kind of like primary information about the work, I think the way we recognize the object is through the channel of it being an artwork.
And is there something in the labor that went into making? Is there something in the process of making that is an important aspect?
I think it's like it's also quite interesting, especially like with kind of like the global trend of artists like involving themselves in mass production or hiring assistants, like I'm going to give the Damien Hirst example because he's the one who's no longer painting his dot paintings. Yeah. But like a bunch of art students or like young artists.
But there are even factories that produce art for various artists, which is also kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is true, actually, especially like large scale sculptures or, like, as like the Olympic Park Anish Kapoor piece, for instance, like he hasn't necessarily, crafted it himself. Yes, perhaps he conceptualized it, designed it, but it was made by a steel company. So definitely like the kind of like the mode of production and let's say as the as the artists started expanding their mediums, use of mediums in their works, there's that kind of question of like originality, authenticity, and kind of like labor intensiveness. It really depends to the artwork. Sometimes it needs that labor intensive approach. Like I'm thinking of, for instance, an école of Korean artists, so like 80s, early 90s, where it was all about calligraphy, but it was all about like, let's say one painting is composed of 360,000 small paintings that are wrapped into triangles and then placed. And of course, like when you meet that object, because of that kind of like time spent and the kind of, eloquency, you do feel something. But then you can also have, how can I say, you can also have a basic, like, let's say, geometric sculpture. I'm thinking of like maybe Amalia Pica, like she works with, like perspex glasses and different colored filters. But then there happens something else. So I think it's really about the artwork and what the artwork needs. And if it is mass production, then it doesn't have to be, how can I say, then that can be a way for it to happen. So it's like means. Yeah, so it's not like really measurable, and it doesn't make, you know, like a small painting and a giant, you know, like like Pollock or, you know, Mondrian or Albers, you know, different. I think they're all very different conversations, and very, very different also ways of understanding the world and responding to that kind of culmination of knowledge. So yeah, so I'm basically fine if people have assistants and they don't do it in hand.
Of course, but I'm just wondering, where do we derive a value from generally? Is the value purely subjective?
I think
I mean, there's also a market, of course, but
yeah, I mean, like, I think we have to really expand the understanding of value, in the sense that I think there are values. It's a plural. It's never a singular. And then that value can be, you know, like the relationship between the artwork and the artist. And then it can be the relationship between the artwork and the public. And it can be with its agent. It could be with its kind of like, let's say, people who are demanding. But, you know, when we say value in art, especially these days, you know, we're immediately looking at the monetary sales value, or, you know, so maybe we have to like expand on to like what worth, this kind of a concept of worth and value. And maybe value is more metric, more quantitative, and worth is, you know, like the cultural worth, the artistic worth, etc., is much more qualitative.
And is that perhaps where the role of institution comes into play, as a kind of bodies that are supposed to value work beyond their monetary value?
Yeah, I think it's a great connection. And I think institutions are already very important for many reasons, but this is also one of those reasons as well. But you know, institutions generate, you know, kind of understandings of what culture is and how culture need to be related to. From the way they display artworks, the way they make exhibitions, the way they talk about it, but also at the same time, you know, they have been at the forefront of change. You know, like even the concept of curator is a very young concept or a position. You know, like, yes, there was the connoisseur of the 15th century, and then becomes, you know, 19th century becomes a caretaker of all these like objects, especially after, you know, like cross-continental transportation was possible, etc. But institutions, especially 19th century, early 20th century, they've been the forebearers of what is happening in arts and culture, what's happening, and then also like really inserting their position as like also what they think is art, what they think is culture, what they think is valuable. But, you know, like when we come to, let's say, post 90s, things have been, you know, shaping differently, especially, you know, like I'm sure you've read the article about, you know, the majority of board members in New York are also the major collectors, and you know, who they collect show their works in those institutions that they sit on their governance level, you know, and then it becomes like a very kind of insular and insidious space. Then you would start questioning, what's the role of the institution, how much of it are they fulfilling, and how much of it is actually like their hands are tied, you know. Of course, by making that exhibition of that artist who is collected by their, you know, board member, enables them to keep fundraising for their sustainability or keeping their doors open. So then there has been a lot of like complications starting to kind of come up, especially with the growth of the art market. I mean, like today we talk about creative industry. There was not a word of creative industry 10 years ago. And now, you know, like we're measuring that it's one of the biggest industries in the UK. So how, like as an employer, there are many museums and galleries and institutions as also like a generator of interest, tourism, and income. Like contributes to the GDP, GPA, GDA,
GDP.
GDA. Yeah,
GDP.
GDPR. But so it's, yes, institutions are important, but I feel that it's at the
Their
moment,
authority, how are we in dialogue with the authority that they have in telling us what we should value? Are we at the point of rejecting some of their authority in telling us what is the valuable thing?
I think there's a big change coming, and I don't know if it's going to be a craze or a trend or a movement, but and this hasn't been only because of COVID. That was already starting to happen, which is that kind of community approach where, like representing communities, local residents in the institutions. So there are many more projects are being done, like it can be like Vienna East, or it can be, Turner, like Turner Contemporary in Margate, or many other parts of the UK. There's that impetus about like how do we expand audiences, and how do we also like kind of make programs or have programming that also represents diverse voices and diverse positions in society. And so in a way that is also breaking that kind of boundary of the institution defines high art, here it is, come and look at it, then it's becoming another level of conversation. But also the position of the institution started shifting already since it became rental places, I think. Like you can hire ICA for your wedding, or if you wanted to get married there, or for your, I don't know, like bachelor party, you can hire
hipster wedding.
That would be cool.
Rich
Yeah,
hipster.
but it really depends, right? Which venue you can afford for your hipsterness. But it's like but that also changes the relationship to those organizations. They're not only the organizations that we go and engage and kind of like attune ourselves to different wavelengths of thinking and perspectives, but it then also becomes like, this is a place I can own. I've seen like at Austria, the National Gallery, like they have wedding photography in there, and I actually like saying the other day to a friend of mine, like a bride was trying to climb on a sculpture just because the light on the sculpture was perfect. And you're like, yeah, that's a new way of relating to art now, so perhaps like we could take this moment to kind of really recalibrate what is it that we want, and what kind of conversations do we want. And yes, we definitely don't want top-down cultural organizations, but what is the new paradigm?
Yeah, it's an interesting balance that I think institutions have to play, in their new openness. It was an incredible music video for, I think it was Beyonce or something, in the Louvre.
Yeah.
It was pretty impressive, but then, it was such a great production that you think, okay, well, that's fine. But you can well imagine a sort of tourist wedding couples
in front of Mona Lisa.
Yes.
It's also a good income stream, like for like cultural organizations to be open for social functions is a very different income stream. And one of the things that COVID showed us is that the cafe shop model is not the sustainable model. So we need to also kind of like reinvent also ways of making ourselves sustainable. But I think it's what I'm questioning is, like what is the extent? I remember once I went to Saatchi and there was a cheese tasting event, which I wasn't invited to, but like there was this giant Parmigiano rolls, wheels, and it really, the whole room smelled cheese, and then there were paintings. It's like, it's really about like,
maybe the cheese was the artwork that you didn't recognize as the artwork.
Maybe, but like in Turkey, I remember.
Saatchi.
Yeah, that's the new edition. But like I remember, like I have a dear friend who is a theater director in Turkey, and then when she took over the directorship of a kind of a small town theater, she was like really telling me that, you know, like people when they're coming to theater, they come with their, you know, like teapots, and then they kind of like biscuits and cake. So it's all about like, you know, while you're picnicking, you're also watching a play. So for her, it was like very important to kind of like, in a way, how can I say, positively inform their relationship to the theater, that it's actually better if you don't eat and drink and
Yeah.
make tea while someone is actually, you know, like on stage. I don't know. Yeah, I'm very much interested in those kind of like dynamics of, you know, yes, authority definitely, but also the how can I say, the dynamics of relationships, you know, like how do you get informed to be relating to something.
So do you recognize institutional authority
In what form?
in a society? Do you recognize that these institutions are claiming certain authority?
I think the thing is like I think we have to revisit this idea of authority, because, you know, like I definitely recognize the governmental institutions, you know, and especially, you know, coming from Turkey, I do recognize when you went into City Hall, you would definitely recognize the kind of, let's say that, you know, like overarching power that is beyond.
Yeah, the theatrical, yeah.
Yeah, and then like we can see a lot of that, you know, like in architecture in Hungary, and, you know, like where there is something that is, you know, there is that sovereign power that is like unattainable or unidentifiable, yet is omnipresent. So I definitely recognize that in architecture and like the way, you know, like institutions operate. But when it comes to UK, I you know, like I don't have that same immediate woohoo, I'm in the, you know, like City Hall or like the Parliament in Turkey. You know, it has a different, there's a different kind of like relationship to it. I mean, you know, I find the institutions here a bit more porous, if I could say that, actually, then more, you know, kind of like regimes, different, you know, like strict regimes, or countries that have stricter regimes.
And you can almost try to think whether the relationship to an institutional authority comes from the urban development of London as a city in relationship to an urban development of Paris as a city, for example.
Yeah.
Where in Paris you get this one line that runs across the city, and at the end of the line there is a Louvre with a big pyramid in front of it. And then on the other line, you know, you don't even know what it is, it's very far away. Where in London, actually, because of this organic development, I mean, yes, the National Gallery has a very prominent position, but actually, I mean, the British Museum is the most hidden national museum you can imagine.
No, that is very true. I mean, like Paris was modeled on Rome, because Rome is modeled on a star, so that there's actually 5 key points in the city that, you know, like they're interconnected. And whereas London, I think it has had many different shifts and changes, like with the big fire, you know, there's actually, I was for one project, I was actually researching the kind of like Freemasonic past, and especially like 1700s, after the big fire, some of the major buildings in London were redesigned or rebuilt, and Hawksmoor was one of the, you know, architects that you can see him on a stained glass in the Guildhall, and it's very interesting in the sense that they wanted to kind of like have, as if I'm not wrong, 3,000 cubic meter distance from each important Masonic location, and the big one is in the Covent Garden, you know, the big Masonic church
Headquarters.
let's say. Yeah, exactly. But then they even shifted St. Paul's direction so that it would actually fit in alignment. So it's very interesting in the sense that London has been having multiple different influences architecturally, and also about its expansion. You know, like there were many outside villages, and then there was only central London. It kind of like started expanding and expanding. I used to live in Stoke Newington, and just across Abbey Park, which is a graveyard, and that's the first graveyard for people from different social castes, because you know, like the higher aristocracy had to be buried within the central London, and etc., etc. So it's very interesting in the sense that there's kind of like multiple strands of movement taking place, and of course the river plays a very significant role in it. Long story short, I feel you know, like how can I say, the architectural domination didn't take place that much. For instance, in Istanbul, you know, when the Ottomans were going weaker and weaker, the scale of synagogues and churches were going higher and higher and higher. And that was also a way of like, in the sense that, you know, like when the Ottomans were strong and there was still this like trading going on, and there was like the French, there was the, you know, Italians living, or the Jewish, but they could only build their religious sites as high as any building, but they couldn't go anything beyond. But as those big families started to loan to the Ottoman Empire, then they could also start to kind of like build bigger synagogues and bigger churches. And that's also very interesting in that sense. So then the architecture, all the built environment.
So the churches and synagogues were built. So churches and synagogues were built simultaneously with the mosques.
No, I mean, like, the thing is, like, you know, it was Constantinople. There were already the Hagia Sophia. There were already, you know, like churches. But what was happening, especially in the 18th century, was that there was a bigger group of, let's say, foreign traders who also settled in Istanbul, or kind of like operating from it. It was also the Silk Road, you know, like, so that it was kind of like a really important hub. And those families had importance in the empire, but they became more important as they started loaning money, and then they could then grow their cultural, if we could say, radius presence, in the city.
Yeah. So did you ever feel an authority yourself? Because I think sometimes we have a feeling that a curator is a position of authority.
No, that's a great question. The thing is, I think I don't, or haven't, and because, and this is also something I'm like rethinking as well, because the way I have experienced authority from, you know, early childhood to my, you know, like teenage years in Turkey, is associated with something that is more like a kind of a dominance for the sake of it, you know, like that, you know, like, because it was also about, you don't kind of experience the way decisions are made, or they're kind of like almost ultimatums that are given to you. And it can be about, like, as a woman, you know, like the society dictates how you know, like how you walk, how you dress, what time you come back home, and how much you drink, you know, all these things outside. So I think there was a lot of kind of like, friction with growing up in a patriarchal society. And in that regard, I think, you know, I would like to really actually revisit and explore these concepts of authority, power, in the sense that how can we proactively understand the ways of making things happen, because I'm interested in making things happen. And I've been working with different scales, like a different scale of production, different scale of projects, you know. And for me, what's been very important is how do I make ideas or artistic visions happen? and that ability definitely flirts with this idea of, you know, like being a kind of a, how can I say, being very good in what you do, and being able to kind of like, I don't know, manage, organize, deliver what you want to do, etc. So we have to perhaps like really think about these terms and really understand, because I feel also like the way we describe power today is still coming from a very patriarchal roots. And yeah.
We were earlier talking about decontextualizing art as a kind of stress test for whether it is art. So you've been decontextualized. But you know, you were, and I put the same argument to Lisa Lefebvre. You know, you were on the Turner Prize committee, right? Which has a certain a level of authority embodied in that kind of decision. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, like I've actually last year has been the year before as well, like has been very important in a way that I've been, you know, sitting on selection committees or in advisory boards for different organizations. You know, it wasn't, I mean, like Turner Prize was very important to also kind of, how can I say, for me to really do my homework, you know, like really follow exhibitions, engage with artists. But the same thing with, you know, when I was on Arts Council Collection Acquisitions Committee, it was a 2-year role. But again, for me, it was very important to kind of like engage with what is happening and how I could contribute to, you know, like what I understood as that, you know, like nation's collection. Same thing with, you know, Scotland in Venice, you know, like that, you know, Scottish Pavilion in Venice, it's going to be now in 2022. Really, it's more about, how can I say, it's more about contributing with passion and contribute. For me, it's really about contributing with passion and critical rigor. So in every board I've been on, I think for me, it's not about, I can choose this person over that person. I'm not interested in that. I'm really interested in what is the conversation here and how is the conversation, how can the conversation expand or become even more, you know, interesting, more dense and more radical, because I'm also, you know, very much interested in, you know, not only following what's going on in the surface of the field, but also like what is really happening around. And these positions enable me to also bring ideas, bring positions, and without necessarily thinking of any kind of a template of these should be the, you know, biggest names, these should be the best-selling artists, this should be the most recognized person. I also do this for ArtNet, you know, like they, you know, or like art review, like the future artists,
The 20,
you know, who do you
top
think?
20.
Yeah, exactly. Or like who we will talk about in
Emerging.
2021. Exactly. But from the way I engage with those, let's say, invitations is really about, how can I say?
But isn't there something? Oh, sorry,
Go.
sorry, FATOŞ. It's just this makes me actually. When I see those top 5, top 20, or 20 artists to follow on Instagram, I actually really hate that actually, because it creates a reference point which is a very narrow. Well, it could be why it could be a good reference point, but it excludes a lot of the world. So though it becomes a reference point, it becomes often the only reference point. So when you Google, when you're trying to search something, you always end up on these, you know, 20, top 40, 40, 40, 40 under 40, and these kind of things. And though that's quite useful for somebody who's trying to research and find out what's going on, it's obviously, as much as it includes people, it actually excludes people.
Yeah, but there's, how can I say, they are temporary captures. So perhaps we need to look at like how they are produced, or what is the context in which they become, you know, let's say the capture. because they are a capture, and by, you know, like a group of people that will be specific to each year, like, you know, and it's intrinsic to every award, every kind of, let's say, representation, or every selection process. There's always inclusion and exclusion. There's also like for your decisions on your everyday, you know, when you decide on one thing, you lose others. You may know and not know what you're losing, but there's always that kind of, how can I say, looking at something. But then, you know, like art world operates on fashions as well. So we can't really deny that there's this kind of, how can I say, increased interest in one person or in one movement or in one way of, let's say, making art. At the moment it's nifties, and you know, like and then that becomes the topic to discuss. But I think the important thing for these lists, or I think a way of like relating to it, is like seeing the big picture. What do they do in the long run, and how do they, you know, like if they can support those artists who are really, you know, like needing that support, needing that moment of recognition, needing that kind of platform, I find them really positive. Like, for instance, with Arts Foundation Awards 2021, I was also on the jury with Lubina Himid and Andrew Durbin. And you know, like there was a short list of 4 amazing artists, and then Tano Sosraku, who's 25 years old, you know, received the award. It's £10,000. It's really good to get something like that when you are at that age, when you are actually, you know, like still finding your way, finding your voice, having that, you know, a moment of recognition, and also at the same time financial support, and also at the same time an emotional support, saying, hey, we believe in what you do. Same thing for all the shortlisted artists, or all the 10 you know, Turner Prize Bursaries this year.
Yeah.
You know, it's really about, how can I say, it's really about the contextualization of that. I really think them as like, you know, temporary captures. Who is it really interesting at the moment is one way of looking at what is happening in the arts. So when I was also doing, for instance, Fig 2, there were people expecting Fig 2 to be like Fig 1, which had these amazing, you know, like flash names from like Mona Hatoum to Runa Islam to, you know, Hussein Chalayan. Yeah, you can see 50, like even Patti Smith. And I even like reviews that people didn't want to come to Fig 2 because they thought I was going to do a kind of a show of top selling 10 artists in the UK today, or things like that. So it is a filter, you know, like it's only a filter, and what you do with that filter is what is most important. I would say.
So it really feels you have responsibility in a way.
Yeah, of course. And you know, for me it's more important to support, and it's more important to contribute to the conversation than define the conversation.
Yeah, I think one thing we don't understand when we see those, say, Turner Prize shortlists or winners, we don't see the curatorial conversation that's gone behind closed doors. And that's again something actually that was really nice in the conversation I had with another curator, Lisa, who was on the same panel. What is it? What do you care about most? What is your starting position?
So, for instance,
what is the thing that you would get in an argument about?
Oh yeah, I think it's really about expanding perspectives, and it's really about digging a bit deeper in those kind of curatorial conversations. And with each, let's say, I mean, like each award, each, you know, country representation is also context specific. So, or like, you know, even a, you know, national collection is context specific. So really understanding the context, but also understanding what could be done, what needs to be done, and how much you can push it, you know. because I think that is very important as well, that there isn't a template in arts, like there isn't a template of how to make art, there isn't a template of how to curate well, but there are, kind of, let's say, set of, like sensitivities or significant positions that needs to be addressed. So in these conversations, I think what really happens when there's genuine conversation is expanding on the work and kind of curatorially, historically, intellectually, but also, again, from the perspective, or at least for me, it's like from the perspective of what is this work doing? How is this work, like significant? One of the key things, for instance, I've been very vocal about is this, like collecting defining works of artists. I don't think there should be a defining work of an artist. Like there might be, yes, but I think, like collections geared towards, purchasing the defining work, the kind of like the masterpiece of that artistic oeuvre, is very limiting. So how can we unpack that? And how can we unpack that, like a work that isn't as strong as, the former work, still collectible and still important because that's still, produced by the artist with different kind of concerns or, let's say surrounding facts in place.
Within the last year of introspection and of real change in paradigms that surround creative production, art, how we observe the world and everything else, there has been a rethinking of the things that you maybe see as a certain kind of hierarchy in terms of what's more important when we talk about art, or generally whether there have been any shifts in what you value in the discourse around art.
So I'm, at the moment I'm actually like in a phase which I really, treasure, is that I'm taking more input than producing more outputs. And there are many like kind of like areas I'm like looking at, some of them that I feel more comfortable with, some of them I feel less comfortable with or, challenged by. But overall, like we are saying that there's a new normal. We want, like when things get back to the new normal, things will change. I don't see that happening immediately. I think it's going to be a phase. It's not going to, it's going to be a phase of 3 to 5 years when things will really start, showing that change, that, let's say that metamorphosis that we've been through. And one of the reasons for that is I think it's so hard to let go. And many colleagues of mine that I'm talking to, they're overwhelmed, super tired, taking the dress rehearsal of a dress rehearsal of reopening or putting a show together or shortening the period of a show or running an organization, furlough, non-furlough, come back, get forward, etc. I feel we're still like holding on to the knowledge of how to get things done. But when we are talking about a new normal, perhaps we need to kind of, let's say, revisit that knowledge. And that could be revisiting even the knowledge of like what we think art is, or maybe expanding onto that.
I mean, that's maybe what I thought.
Yeah.
We should talk about that, is how to get things done and how that is a really key. And I think that is something that is really powerful in what you're saying in curatorial practices. How do you get things done as a really important knowledge that you hold and that you deploy. But I think maybe before we maybe reflect on that is another point that you've just mentioned, that is almost this cliche question, what the art is, in terms of perhaps where the authority lies or what we consider important or what we give certain value.
Definitely. I mean, like as many organizations were kind of like forced to become digital. And that was still a slow and steady process that many institutions were taking. I think this kind of like the notion of digital art took forward. And at the moment, you know, one of the things that challenged me is to kind of like really try to understand this nifties and how it's now, you know, like shaking the art market, quote unquote.
What are the nifties? Sorry, I don't.
You know, this non-fungible tea.
More digital.
It's a digital, it's like a Bitcoin, but then it's kind of like, it's basically a unique Bitcoin. If one person buys it, nobody else can buy it. And I don't know if you heard of this, but like a collector in China bought a $400,000 worth of a Banksy piece, and they burned it, and then they filmed the destruction of it, and then they sold the video on, you know, like on NFTs for $700,000. And then there's also like all this like new artists emerging who are the digital artists, and then they're, you know, like they only sell on Bitcoin. And then there's this kind of speculation of, I saw yesterday this artwork which basically looks like a tacky painting only done in neon colors for like $6 million or things like that. So there's a lot of like, you know, speculation going on. At the same time, there are many artists who are actually trying to understand what is digital art and how can you become digital, because we have also experienced that some of the really, how can I say, weighty works are not really prone to be exhibited on digital mediums. You know, like some interesting film works, they need actually atriums, because you kind of need to be in that black box and, you know, subsumed to it and devoid of any
or
other
multi-channel video work.
Yeah, exactly. Or these kind of like, you know, like how to experience a Pierre Hugues installation through digital screens. So then what is happening is this kind of like, I think there's an interesting urge, but also I sometimes feel there's this kind of the drive to get like immediate gains. So in a way, how can I say, like, you know, each medium, like photography, painting, sculpture, is also a language. So for an artist to produce in that medium, they would need to, I mean, like I would imagine they would need to, in a way, learn that language, learn the phonetics of that language, and learn the poetics of that language, you know, like learn to make jokes in that language and puns and, you know, let's say unprecedented connections, etc. So I think digital, if that's going to be a medium, we have to learn it as a language. And I'm feeling the confusion right now is, without learning the language, by just like using words, we're kind of creating that fragmented tourist or a touristic kind of conversation, where we can only order a coffee, but then if they say, do you want sugar in it, we can't say anything. It's a terrible example, but and I feel there's that confusion of, okay, now we need to become digital, so I need to make digital works, but how to do that? And many of the examples I've seen are like almost like linear translations of concepts or ideas coming from science, from, you know, like gaming, from different technologies. So I feel that's been like a big confusion, because we also know that, you know, like the immediate future is not going to be, you know, physical only. I was reading actually on FT Weekend, there's this term coined by a FT writer, Lucy something, called phygital. So she coined the term physical and digital, and the title of the article was like future is phygital, so that it's going to be always an amalgamation of both. The programming will be that, Mm-hmm. I think we just need to, give some time, and also, how can I say, allow ourselves to learn from it and accept that we might not know, or we might feel stupid, but we don't want to feel stupid. Just let go of that.
Have you, within the last year, revisited some work of art that was compelling to you, and you've kind of seen it in new light?
That's That's a great question. I was thinking and looking at, especially the beginning of the pandemic, that's one that I looked back to letters by Dada artists or Dadaists. They didn't call them artists themselves, and I'm interested in, you know, like what kind of art practices we will see. You know, I've been also questioned like, oh, will there be a COVID art? I'm sure there will be, you know, like definitely no escape. But I think what will happen is that kind of playfulness again, bit like the surrealists. But there's this method of making proofs in maths called Reductio ab Absurdum. So it's basically reduction to absurdity. So what you do is like to prove something that is certain, you actually accept that it's negative is true. Like the first proof I learned when I studied maths was like square root of 2 is irrational. So we have to prove that. And you're like, that is by definition, you know, like it's a tree is a tree, you know, it's a tautology. No, it's not. Anyway, so I'm interested in, you know, like if there will be these kind of like artistic positions or practices where there will be that reduction to absurdity, that almost like kind of negating the present in a very kind of playful, but in a very kind of pokey and punchy ways that might perhaps inspire and in a way inform the art as we know it.
You often talk about unconventionality and encouraging unconventional, encouraging the, I have it written down, unorthodox.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, I think what you've just given us is maybe an explanation of what you mean by that, because that's what I kind of wanted to ask is how do you define the unconventional? Well, you probably have to define the conventional first, and then the question is, well, what is conventional? And in a sense, I have a feeling you've already answered this question, but how do you define the conventional?
I think it's sometimes conventional is the immediate, you know, like the immediate idea that comes to your mind or the immediate response. And sometimes the conventional is the most comfortable in the way it can be done, or it can be realized, or it can be discussed even, you know, like talked about. And sometimes conventional is about the average, you know, the average of all the different point of views, all the different positions, all the different feelings, sensations. So yeah.
You can't escape the maths.
No. Yeah, I tried.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about maths, but in your kind of equation of how to what is ordinary is the kind of middle ground.
I was actually planning to ask you questions, but I thought you would start with different questions. So then I started talking my head off. But yeah.
You can ask me a question if you want.
Can you identify what is art and what's not? Or if so, what kind of tools do you employ?
Oh, that's a difficult. Right, I don't know. I mean, I don't really think about it, actually. I think I don't engage with that question. I don't try to disregard something that is presented to me as art, though I often mention the RA summer show as something that I don't really consider art. I almost, because of maybe the way it's presented, or because of this average that you were talking about, it almost becomes a little bit of a disappointing average. You know, not that there aren't some amazing individual works, but I think when it's presented in such a way, well, I think there is a lack of progress. You know, it's like you go into this show every year and it really looks the same every year. And I think that's maybe the way I recognize artists when I see something that not necessarily haven't seen before, but something that gives me something that I don't have, or it helps me have a different perspective on something that I have.
Yeah. But like it might be that the summer show needs that familiarity, so that it needs to look familiar, and then that's why it needs to look the same, so that it will be recognized as art as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
No, because our relationship.
Yeah, but there is no. Yeah, but you'll never see a performance piece in that, or you won't see a video installation. And not that there has to be a video installation or anything like that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's quite curious, because I think there's that, definitely that kind of a blurred space where when we recognize something from its features, and when we have already seen something, like, it could be like a song that we've listened to and we loved, and then there's another one that is almost similar but different lyrics and bit of different tempo here and there. Yeah, it's I find that, because there's that is a methodology for many big institutions to install exhibitions always in the same manner, so that it's recognizable. And then that's also also immediately comforts you, because where art will appear. It's not going to be jumping on your face, or kind of like you will tumble down. Where to look at, how to, all the possible places that the art will be.
And it's almost that, the Cornelia Parker piece that she always has with the photograph of the dots, is kind of a testament to the repetition of it. It's like,
maybe we need to ask her.
I would love to. What resonates with me a lot is when you were saying how things get done. And it's almost, it takes courage. I have a feeling it takes courage to just do things, because often there is a fear of being judged, which you almost, as a curator, it's your job to get over that before you've done anything, because it's public. The purpose of your work is to publicize something, is to put it up for discussion.
But then what kind of tools do you give the audience to kind of aid that discussion? I think that is very important. And that's why I think like responsibility, like among many things, but lies in the core of curating. And you have to be aware. Of course, there might be things that you haven't thought that is natural, or you haven't really taken into account different, like approaches, or the way the work can be taken or interpreted. You can't have control over these things, but at least if you know what kind of conversation you're after, I think that's the most important part of it. Like, for instance, with like Fig 2, for me it was the way I wanted to contextualize it was like a non-institutional institution. It had a vision, it had like all the kind of like what an institution needs, a roof on its top and a team and like a vision, etc. But I was very much interested in like producing the whole program in a way that is a giant conversation. And that was about, maybe it was too kind of, let's say, grand narrative-ish. Like I was like interested in the, aesthetic and critical currency of our times, like what is it that we are looking at? What kind of exhibitions do we need? Or what kind of art do we get excited or moved by? But the way the exhibitions were planned, also because of the time constraints, I was only appointed like 2.5 months before the first show, and Christmas was in between. So, you know, throughout the year, I invited artists 10 days before their opening or 3 weeks before their opening. There are some rare exceptions where artists work for 6 months or 9 months on that commission. But it was really about like that kind of, perhaps like that porousness is about understanding exhibitions. Sometimes it would be really a still show where there would be like items on the walls or on the floor, or, you know, an installation. And sometimes it was a process. So the whole production of the work actually unfolded in the space through interaction with audiences, that you could book sessions. Sometimes it became the artist studio, that there was no complete artwork and the whole artwork actually evolved through the week. Or sometimes it was how can I say, it was actually you know, almost like reconfiguration of different artists, but also at the same time like building an exhibition on top of an exhibition. Or sometimes it was making an exhibition about performance without performing bodies, you know. So it was about really exploring, you know, yeah, in a way, like it really fits with that conventionality, exploring the unconventional, and not necessarily for the sake of doing that. Oh, I'm so cool to explore the unconventional, but it was really about like, what else can be done, what else can be said, and how else can we think about exhibitions, and how can we kind of understand the dogma around them, and then kind of like break it. Because I was also reading about the kind of like, the term is from 15th century, but legal terminology. So exhibition was used for like exhibiting, displaying the proofs of evidence. And if you think about that, then the artwork becomes the proof of evidence of that, you know, like a curatorial concept, which I'm very challenged by, you know, like I don't think that does, you know, good for the artwork, neither the curator, nor the exhibition, nor the space, nor, you know, nor where and how and when it's happening. Yeah.
And I think there's also something that we haven't mentioned, and whether this is part of the conversation or not, but there's also that thing of what's obvious in this example that you've just given us, is that there is something about a network. You're kind of a communicator, somebody who drags all these people in. And I don't know whether that also is an element of getting things done and making things happen.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's almost like kind of a diagrammatic study, if we could say that, in the sense that there is that autonomy of that diagram. It's not like, you know, it's not, you know, that I'm in the center of it and it's kind of creating a spider web, but it's more like I would call it more like an amorphous diagram that all, you know, like it's almost like kind of a neural network system that already exists, but then you create new neural pathways, you know. Yeah. With actually Francesco Pedraglio and Patrick Coyle, you know, like they're working with performance, objects, sculpture, installation, etc. And they're both, I would say, working in the medium of language, but so very different, like very, very different approach, attitude, style, aesthetic, you know, ingenuity. But I wanted to put them together, and they initially said no. Because they were like, yeah, they couldn't see anything, you know. They're like, how can we be together? It's like, we're so different. I was like, okay, you know, stay with me. So what we did is like, I'm really inspired by the surrealists and the games. So we set up a structure where I would send both of them an exercise, something to do. And like, let's say, I think the first exercise was like, go outside, sit at a bus stop, and you know, like bring an impression from that. And then Patrick made kind of a pattern, Francesco did something else, and then the next, it was Francesco's turn, so that building on that exercise, he would give us an exercise and we would do the same, and then we would exchange with each other. And this wasn't part of the exhibition, by the way. This was almost like a pre-production phase where I was very much interested in how can I start a dialogue that is not conversational, but actually true production of ideas or true kind of like projections of, experience together. And it really, it was like a weaving, so it almost kind of like then brought them together. And the exhibition still looks like very, there's two different voices. I mean, like Francesco is a minimalist, and Patrick was like finding a, Dyson vacuum cleaner and then flagging it to the exhibition space and playing it with a piano. So it was like really different methodologies, like one is like total control and one is all about randomness or serendipity, etc. But in a way, it came together in a very curious way. And that was, that was also very, I mean, for me, it was also so rewarding just to be part of that.
And it looks like there is an educational element in it.
In what sense?
In a sense that the guidance almost.
Not education, but I think guidance is better. I think it's about guidance, but it's also about like I was part of it. It wasn't like go play guys or like go solve this problem.
Yeah.
I was part of that game. And I was part of the play, but then I also made a point to extract myself because I didn't want to be part of their work. I mean,
because what's interesting there,
part of their work,
but what's interesting there is that you're like, okay, I'm an artist, but no, I'm not an artist.
No.
So where do I stop? Where do I stop myself in order to not become the artist because I'm not the artist? It's almost like you're kind of always in a state of panic. To suddenly...
No. I know I know where to step back, I think. Yeah.
And that moment where you step back, that's what makes you not an artist and what makes you a curator, maybe.
I think so.
So it'd be nice to kind of draw the boundary. It's like, what can you do and what can't you do?
Yeah, I mean, how can I say? I wouldn't be involved in the production of the work. I would be involved in the production of ideas and production of the structure that the work can arise. If that is this kind of like the birth of Venus idea of like that vertical manifestation. But I would not make comments on a color palette that the painter is using, or on an installation where I would insert also like other sculptures that, looks good or anything. But I would definitely have conversations and sometimes battles with artists about like how to display it well. I remember once when I was doing this show in Berlin and the artists, because I wanted to kind of like have a floating screen in the space. When you come in, you would almost be blocked to see the whole show. And then they came up with another idea, and then I came up with an idea. We had such a big conversation, and but then I surrendered. They were right, and then